30,000 feet above the Atlantic Ocean, inside the quiet luxury of a late-night international flight, something happened that no one on board would ever forget. At first, it looked like just another routine journey. Soft cabin lights glowed against polished wood panels. The low hum of the aircraft engines blended with the quiet murmurs of first-class passengers settling into their seats. Businessmen checked their phones. A couple whispered over glasses of champagne. A few exhausted travelers leaned back, hoping to sleep through the long flight. Everything felt calm, ordinary, predictable. But what none of those passengers realized was that within the next hour, a single sentence spoken by a young African flight attendant would send a shockwave through that entire cabin. Wow, a sentence so bold, so unexpected, that several passengers would later replay the moment in their minds again and again, because the man she said it to was not someone you spoke to casually, not someone you joked with, and definitely not someone you challenged. His name was Kang Min-jae. To most people on the plane, he looked like just another wealthy businessman traveling quietly across continents. But to the few passengers who recognized him, the atmosphere changed instantly. They knew the rumors, the whispered stories, the kind of stories people only share behind closed doors. Stories about powerful companies collapsing after crossing him. Stories about rivals who disappeared without explanation. Stories about a quiet empire stretching from Seoul to cities far beyond. Even the flight crew had been warned before departure. Avoid unnecessary interaction, serve him professionally, and most importantly, do not attract his attention. So for the first few hours of that flight, everyone followed those instructions perfectly. Everyone except one person. A young Nigerian flight attendant named Nia Okafor, confident, observant, and strangely calm in a situation where most people would feel uneasy. But here's the part that made the entire moment even stranger. Kang Min-jae had been watching her. Not in the way most men watch a beautiful woman. No, his gaze was different, focused, studying, almost as if he was trying to figure something out. At first, Nia ignored it. Flight attendants are used to being watched by passengers, but after the third time she noticed those quiet, calculating eyes following her across the aisle, she realized something. He wasn't just looking at her, he was analyzing her. And that's when she decided to do something no one else on that plane would have dared to do. Instead of avoiding him like the rest of the crew, Nia Okafor walked straight toward him. Step by step, through the quiet first-class cabin, a few passengers noticed. One businessman lowered his newspaper slightly. Another passenger glanced over the rim of her wine glass. Even one of Kang Min-jae's security men subtly straightened in his seat, because everyone on that flight knew one thing. Approaching Kang Min-jae without reason was not a good idea. But Nia didn't stop. She walked right up to his seat, paused for a moment, then leaned slightly closer, just enough for only him to hear her. And with a calm voice that carried both confidence and mystery, she whispered a sentence that would freeze the entire cabin. "Your eyes are undressing me. Do you want the rest?" For a split second, time seemed to stop. A man across the aisle nearly dropped his drink. Two passengers looked at each other in disbelief. Even one of the security guards slowly turned his head. Because nobody, absolutely nobody, spoke to Kang Min-jae that way. Not strangers, not employees, not even people who worked for him. And yet here was a flight attendant standing calmly beside him, as if she had just said something completely ordinary. For several seconds, Kang Min-jae didn't respond. He simply looked at her. Those same dark, unreadable eyes studying her again. But this time, there was something new behind them. Curiosity. Yeah, then slowly, very slowly, the most dangerous man on that flight smiled. And the moment he did, the entire situation changed. But what no one on that aircraft understood yet was that this bold sentence was only the beginning. Because hours later, after that plane finally landed, authorities from two different countries would begin asking questions about what really happened during that flight. And the truth behind Nia Okafor's bold move would turn out to be far more shocking than anyone expected. So stay with this story, because what happened next between a fearless African flight attendant and one of the most feared men in Asia would leave even the passengers on that plane completely stunned. But before we continue, I'm curious about something. Stories like this travel across the world, and it's always amazing to see how far they reach. So tell me in the comments, where are you watching from today? And if you enjoy mysterious stories like this, the kind where every twist reveals something you didn't see coming, consider subscribing to the channel, because the deeper this story goes, the more unbelievable it becomes. Now let's rewind a little and talk about the man sitting quietly in seat 2A, the man everyone else on that flight was afraid to look at, Kang Min-jae. The name Kang Min-jae did not appear on news headlines very often, and that was exactly the way he preferred it. In public records, he was listed as a successful international investor, a quiet businessman who owned logistics companies, shipping interests, and private investment firms scattered across Asia. On paper, his life looked ordinary. But among people who operated in darker circles, the name Kang Min-jae carried a very different weight. In Seoul's underground economy, whispers about him traveled faster than facts. They said he had built an empire that never officially existed, an invisible network of influence stretching through shipping routes, high-end casinos, private security firms, and silent partnerships with powerful people who preferred never to be named. No one could prove these things, but strange patterns followed him. Competitors who challenged him often disappeared from the market within months. Companies that refused his offers suddenly faced financial disasters that no one could explain. And yet, through it all, Kang Min-jae remained untouchable, calm, quiet, and always several steps ahead of anyone who tried to understand him. That night, but he had boarded the flight under a different kind of secrecy. There were no public meetings scheduled, no press appearances, no official announcements, just a quiet arrival planned in Lagos, Nigeria, and only a small number of people knew why. But something else unusual had already happened before the plane even left the ground, because the moment he stepped onto that aircraft, he noticed something that didn't feel right. It wasn't the passengers, it wasn't the crew, it was the feeling of being watched, not openly, not aggressively, but carefully, as if someone on board had already recognized him and was observing his every move. At first, Kang Min-jae dismissed the thought. After years of living in dangerous circles, paranoia could easily become a habit. But then he noticed her, the flight attendant, Nia Okafor. Most flight attendants moved through the cabin with polite professionalism, smiling, serving drinks, checking on passengers. But Nia moved differently. She paid attention to details most people ignored. Which passengers were nervous, which ones were quiet, which ones were watching others, and most importantly, which ones were pretending not to watch. The first time Kang Min-jae noticed her, she was helping an elderly passenger store a carry-on bag. But even while she spoke politely, her eyes briefly scanned the cabin. It was a small movement, almost invisible. But Kang Min-jae noticed. The second time he observed her, she was passing through the aisle with a tray of drinks. Yet somehow, without appearing obvious, she checked the reflection in a window panel behind him. Almost like she wanted to confirm whether he was looking at her, which he was. And by the third time their eyes met across the cabin, both of them understood something silently. They were watching each other, not as strangers, but as two people trying to solve a puzzle. And that silent game continued for nearly an hour. Until finally, Nia decided to break the tension with a sentence that would leave the entire plane speechless. But what nobody else on that aircraft understood yet was that the moment she walked toward Kang Min-jae, both of them had already started playing a dangerous game of perception, a game where neither person wanted to reveal their true intentions first. And now, after her bold whisper reached his ears, Kang Min-jae realized something unexpected. This woman was not afraid of him, not even a little, which immediately made her the most interesting person on that plane. For several seconds after Nia's whisper, the quiet hum of the aircraft seemed louder than before. Passengers who had overheard the words were now pretending not to stare, but their curiosity was impossible to hide. No one had ever spoken to Kang Min-jae that way before. Not confidently, not playfully, and certainly not in front of witnesses. The question hanging in the air was simple. How would he respond? Nia remained calm, her posture relaxed, her expression neutral. But internally, she was watching him carefully. Because the truth was, that sentence had never been meant as flirtation. It had been a test, a psychological one. Most powerful men reacted to bold challenges in one of two ways: anger or dominance. But Kang Min-jae reacted differently. He smiled. Oh, not a wide smile, just the smallest hint of amusement. The kind of smile that suggested he understood far more than he was revealing. Then slowly, he closed the book that had been resting on his lap, looked up at her again, and asked quietly, "Do you always speak to passengers like that?" His voice was calm, controlled, but behind it was a curiosity that had suddenly replaced the tension in the cabin. Nia tilted her head slightly, almost as if considering the question. Then she replied just as calmly, "Only the ones who stare long enough to make it obvious." A few seats away, one of the businessmen listening discreetly nearly laughed, but quickly stopped himself. Because even though the exchange sounded playful, there was something else happening beneath the surface, something sharper. It was like two experienced negotiators slowly measuring each other's intelligence. And that was when Kang Min-jae decided to do something unexpected. He stood up. Immediately, two men seated several rows behind him straightened in their seats. His security team, their attention locked onto the situation instantly. But Kang Min-jae made a small gesture with his hand. A silent signal. Stay where you are. The two men relaxed again. Then he stepped into the aisle, standing only a few feet away from Nia. Passengers nearby watched nervously, because now the interaction had become impossible to ignore. But instead of showing irritation, Kang Min-jae simply studied her expression, carefully. And after a long pause, he said something that surprised even her. "You knew who I was before you walked over here." It wasn't a question. And it was a statement that Nia didn't answer immediately. Instead, she picked up the empty glass from his table and placed it onto her tray. Still calm, still composed. Then she said softly, "Well, let's just say, I try to know a little about everyone on my flights." But Kang Min-jae shook his head slightly. "No." His voice lowered. "You know more than that." And that was the moment when the invisible tension between them shifted again. Because Nia realized something important. He was far more observant than most people gave him credit for, which meant the game they were playing had just become much more complicated. And neither of them had revealed their true cards yet. But what neither of them knew was that someone else on the plane had also been watching this entire interaction very carefully. Someone sitting quietly near the back of the cabin. Someone who had no interest in drinks, or sleep, or entertainment, because that passenger had boarded the plane with a very different mission. And the conversation unfolding between Nia Okafor and Kang Min-jae was about to make that mission much more dangerous. As the aircraft continued its steady journey across the dark Atlantic sky, the quiet drama unfolding in first class was becoming impossible to ignore. Passengers who had initially tried to mind their own business were now openly curious. Because the interaction between Nia and Kang Min-jae didn't look like a normal passenger-crew conversation anymore. It looked strategic, almost like a conversation happening on two different levels at once. One visible, one hidden, and that made people nervous. The cabin manager noticed it too. From across the aisle, he had been watching the exchange with growing concern. Because before the flight departed, he had been briefed about Kang Min-jae's presence. Not in detail, but enough to know one thing. Do not create unnecessary situations around this passenger. And right now, that was exactly what seemed to be happening. So he quickly approached Nia as she stepped on away from Kang Min-jae's seat. His voice was low but urgent. "Nia, come here for a moment." She followed him toward the small service area near the galley. The moment they were out of earshot of passengers, he leaned closer and whispered, "Do you have any idea who that man is?" Nia looked at him calmly. "Yes." The answer surprised him. "Then why are you talking to him like that?" For a brief moment, she didn't respond. Instead, she glanced down the aisle where Kang Min-jae had returned to his seat, still watching her, still curious. Then she turned back to the manager and said quietly, "Because I needed to see how he would react." The manager blinked. React to what? But Naya didn't answer that question. Instead, she picked up another tray of drinks, straightened her uniform, and stepped back into the cabin, leaving the manager standing there, completely confused. Because now he realized something unsettling. Naya Okafor was not behaving like someone who had accidentally crossed a powerful passenger. She was behaving like someone who had planned the entire encounter. And somewhere behind her calm expression, there was clearly a reason that nobody else on that plane understood yet. But that mystery was about to grow even deeper. Because just as Nia began walking back toward the aisle, Kang Min-jae suddenly stood up again, this time heading straight toward her. And the moment their eyes met again, both of them realized the same thing. The real conversation between them had only just begun. The moment Kang Min-jae stood up from his seat again, the atmosphere inside the cabin changed instantly. A quiet tension spread across first class like a ripple in still water. Several passengers who had been pretending to read or watch movies slowly looked up, not openly, but just enough to see what was happening. Because everyone understood one thing. When a man like Kang Min-jae decides to stand up in the middle of a flight, it usually means something important is about to happen. His steps were slow, measured. The kind of walk that made people instinctively move out of the way without being asked. Even the faint clinking of glasses on nearby tables seemed to stop. Nia noticed him approaching almost immediately. But unlike the nervous passengers around them, she didn't step back. She didn't look uncomfortable. She simply stood there beside the aisle with her tray in hand, watching him just as carefully as he was watching her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. They were only a few feet apart now, close enough for a quiet conversation, but far enough that anyone nearby could still sense the tension. Then Kang Min-jae finally broke the silence. "You said something earlier that most people wouldn't dare say." His voice was calm, almost thoughtful. Naya tilted her head slightly. "Did it bother you?" He paused, then shook his head slowly. "Oh, no." Another pause. "In fact, it made this flight much more interesting." For the first time since the conversation began, Naya allowed herself a faint smile, but she said nothing. And that silence intrigued him even more. Because most people, when faced with his attention, either tried too hard to impress him or rushed to apologize for offending him. Naya did neither. Instead, she waited. And Kang Min-jae respected that. So he asked another question. "Tell me something honestly." She raised an eyebrow. "All right. When you walked over to my seat earlier," his eyes narrowed slightly. "What exactly were you trying to find out?" For the briefest moment, the question hung between them like a challenge, because both of them knew the truth. This conversation had never been accidental, and now it was time to see who would admit it first. Instead of answering immediately, Nia set her tray down on a nearby service cart. A small but deliberate action. It meant she was no longer pretending to focus on her job. Now the conversation had her full attention. She looked directly at Kang Min-jae. "You really want to know?" He nodded once. "Yes." Another short pause. Then Naya spoke carefully. "I wanted to see whether the stories about you were true." The response caught him slightly off guard, not because of what she said, but because of how calmly she said it. Most people avoided mentioning the rumors surrounding him. They pretended they didn't exist. But Naya addressed them openly, and that honesty amused him. "So," he leaned slightly closer, "what do the stories say?" Naya looked around briefly to confirm no one was standing too close. Then she spoke in a quiet voice. They say you're a man who never reacts emotionally. They say you calculate everything. They say you always know more than the person sitting across from you." Kang Min-jae's expression didn't change, but inside, he was impressed. Very few strangers would dare speak to him with that level of confidence. "And do you believe those stories?" he asked. Naya shrugged lightly. "I wasn't sure." "So you decided to test me?" She nodded. "Yes." He crossed his arms slowly. "And what did you learn?" Her answer came without hesitation, that you're even more observant than people realize. That comment made him smile again, because she was absolutely right. From the moment she approached his seat earlier, he had already begun analyzing her. Her posture, her eye contact, the subtle way she watched passengers without appearing obvious. And all signs of someone trained to notice things others ignored, which raised a very interesting question, and Kang Min-jae decided to ask it directly. Nia, his tone became more serious now. How long have you been pretending to be just a flight attendant? The words landed like a quiet thunderclap, because he had just confirmed what she had been trying to hide. He knew, or at least he suspected, and now the game had officially begun. For a moment, Nia didn't react. Her expression remained calm, but inside her mind a dozen possibilities raced through her thoughts. He had figured out something, but how much? Did he suspect her true role? Or was he simply making an educated guess? She needed more information before answering, so she responded with a question of her own. What makes you think I'm pretending? Kang Min-jae chuckled quietly. Well, a lot of reasons. He began counting them casually on his fingers. You noticed my security team before they noticed you. You checked the cabin reflections 3 times. You memorized the passenger list. And most importantly, he leaned closer. You approached me without hesitation. Then he finished with a statement that made her heart skip for the first time that night. Flight attendants don't study people like that. Silence followed, but it wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It was the silence of 2 intelligent people realizing they had just discovered something significant about each other. Finally, Nia spoke again. You're right. Kang Min-jae raised an eyebrow. That wasn't the answer I expected. Well, she folded her arms slightly. You asked for honesty. Now his curiosity was fully awakened. Neha, so tell me the truth. Why are you really on this flight? Nia looked at him carefully, then she gave him an answer that changed everything. I'm here to observe someone. He smiled slowly. And that someone is me. She didn't confirm it, but she didn't deny it either, which was confirmation enough. But Kang Min-jae didn't seem angry. If anything, he seemed entertained, because the situation had suddenly become much more interesting. And just as he was about to say something else, a voice interrupted them. A passenger from the back of the cabin stood up suddenly, and the look on his face made both of them turn around immediately, because the man looked nervous, very nervous, and he was staring directly at Kang Min-jae, as if he had just recognized him. But what happened next would turn the entire flight into something far more dangerous than either Nia or Kang Min-jae had anticipated. The man standing in the aisle looked out of place. His suit was wrinkled, his breathing slightly uneven, and the way he kept glancing around the cabin suggested he wasn't comfortable being there. At first glance, he appeared to be just another anxious traveler, but Kang Min-jae noticed something immediately. The man wasn't looking at the flight attendants. He wasn't looking at the passengers. He was looking directly at him. And that made Kang Min-jae's instincts sharpen instantly, because people who recognized him usually reacted in one of 2 ways. They either avoided eye contact completely, or they stared with curiosity. But this man looked afraid, which meant one thing. No, he knew exactly who Kang Min-jae was, and whatever he knew, it was making him nervous. Nia noticed it too. She leaned slightly closer to Kang Min-jae and whispered quietly, "Friend of yours?" Kang Min-jae shook his head once. No, but his eyes never left the man, because there was something else strange happening now. The 2 security guards, sitting several rows behind, had also noticed the passenger, and they were already standing up, slowly, carefully, trying not to alarm the rest of the cabin, which meant the situation was escalating fast. The nervous passenger finally spoke, but his voice trembled slightly. I need to talk to you." Several passengers nearby turned to look. The tension inside the aircraft suddenly became impossible to ignore. Kang Min-jae didn't move. Yet he simply watched the man for a few seconds before responding. "And why would you want to do that?" The passenger swallowed hard, then said something that shocked everyone within earshot. "Because if you don't listen to me," he glanced toward the cockpit briefly, "none of us might make it to Lagos." And just like that, the quiet luxury flight 30,000 feet above the ocean had transformed into something far more dangerous. A mystery, a threat, and possibly a trap. But the most shocking part? The man wasn't looking at Kang Min-jae when he said it. He was looking directly at Nia. The cabin was suddenly silent. Every passenger's gaze darted back and forth between Nia, Kang Min-jae, and the man who had just spoken. The man's hands were slightly trembling as he clutched a small black briefcase. He seemed ordinary at first glance, but Kang Min-jae's trained instincts screamed otherwise. This wasn't a passenger. This wasn't a man who had accidentally wandered onto a flight he shouldn't be on. No, this was a messenger, or perhaps a warning. The way he glanced at Nia, it was as if he expected her to understand something she wasn't supposed to. Nia's eyes narrowed, but she remained calm. Years of experience in tense situations had taught her one thing: don't panic until it's absolutely necessary. She leaned subtly toward Kang Min-jae and whispered, "Do you know him?" He shook his head slightly, his jaw tight. "Not personally," he said quietly, "but I know exactly what he's capable of." The man's voice broke the silence again. "You don't understand what's happening tonight. It's bigger than anyone on this plane realizes." Passengers shifted uneasily in their seats, and some reached for their phones, others leaned forward. But nobody dared interrupt the conversation, because even from a distance, the tension was palpable. Then the man opened the briefcase just slightly, enough to reveal a thick envelope. Kang Min-jae's eyes flicked to it instantly, and in that moment, he understood. The flight was no longer just a flight. It was a meeting ground, a setup, and Nia, she was at the center of it. Nia's heart raced, but her face remained composed. She glanced briefly at the man holding the envelope. "Who sent you?" she asked quietly, her voice carrying just enough authority that the passenger flinched. The man swallowed hard, almost choking on his own words. They know you're here. They know he's here, and they know what you're capable of." Kang Min-jae tilted his head, studying both of them carefully, whilst a smirk slowly appeared across his face. That calm, almost dangerous smirk that sent shivers through anyone who had ever seen it. "So," he said slowly, voice low and deliberate, "you've been sent here to warn me, or to test me." The man hesitated, eyes darting to the cockpit, then back at Nia. I don't know," he admitted, "but I know that if you don't handle this carefully, no one will leave this plane the same way." Nia's lips pressed together. She understood now why she had been chosen for this flight. Her mission had never been about serving drinks or guiding passengers to their seats. It had been about observing, anticipating, and confronting someone who moved in the shadows far darker than the average criminal or corporate competitor. She looked at Kang Min-jae and whispered, "They know about you, and they know about me." He nodded slowly. "Then it seems our flight just got a lot more interesting." And in that moment, both of them knew the rules had changed. The plane's engines hummed softly, but in the cabin, bam, chaos was quietly brewing. The man with the envelope suddenly lunged slightly, as if to emphasize his warning. "You have to understand," he said, voice rising just enough to catch attention. "There's someone on this flight, someone who isn't supposed to be here. Someone who's tracking both of you." Kang Min-jae's eyes narrowed. He had already felt it. That subtle, almost imperceptible presence watching them. And now it was confirmed. Nia's mind raced. Her calm exterior masked the rapid calculations running through her head. She could feel the layers of deception surrounding this flight, each one more dangerous than the last. Suddenly, the man gasped, pointing toward the back of the cabin. "There," he whispered urgently, "by the emergency exit. You'll see him if you look carefully." Kang Min-jae moved with lightning speed. In a fluid motion, he stepped toward the back of the cabin, eyes locked on a shadowy figure slipping between seats. Passengers gasped, some ducking instinctively. But the figure was fast, far too fast for ordinary people. Nia followed, heart pounding, but her nerves remained steel. She had faced dangerous men before, but this was something different. And then it happened. The figure vanished, leaving behind a small black card lying on the carpet. Kang Min-jae picked it up slowly. His fingers brushed the card, and as he read it, his face shifted from curiosity to shock. The card contained a message that would change everything. "Wow, the real target is not who you think. Watch your left and do not trust the crew." For a heartbeat, neither Nia nor Kang Min-jae spoke. Then he whispered, Looks like the flight just became a trap. The message on the card hung heavily between them. Every passenger in first class suddenly felt a subtle shift in the air. It was as if the plane itself had grown smaller, tighter, more suffocating. Naya leaned toward Kang Min-jae, whispering softly, "We need to find out who sent this, and fast." He nodded, scanning the cabin with an intensity that made even the security personnel tense. "This isn't just a flight anymore," he said. "It's a test, a challenge, and I don't like being tested without knowing all the rules." Passengers whispered nervously, some glancing toward the flight attendants, others toward the cockpit. And no one knew that the next hour could determine who survived the flight intact. And for Naya and Kang Min-jae, the stakes were clear. One wrong move, and everything they knew would collapse. As they prepared to confront the next layer of mystery, neither of them realized just how close danger had already come. Because somewhere in the shadows of the cabin, someone was watching. And that observer wasn't just tracking them. They were planning, waiting, smiling quietly at how easy it was to manipulate even the most dangerous people on the plane. The shadowy figure at the back of the cabin had been quiet, almost invisible. Until now, Kang Min-jae's gaze locked onto the movement. Naya, noticing his alertness, followed his eyes. Suddenly, the figure stepped into the dim light of the cabin, and everything changed. It was not a man, not an ordinary passenger. It was a woman, a sleek, imposing figure dressed entirely in black. Her eyes glimmered with deadly precision. The passengers gasped, some instinctively reaching for phones. The flight attendants froze. But Kang Min-jae and Naya, they barely flinched. Because from the first moment he saw her, Kang Min-jae recognized something immediately. This woman was trained. Not a casual observer, not a courier, a professional, and her presence here was no accident. She moved with absolute control, her footsteps silent despite the polished cabin floor. Her eyes locked onto Kang Min-jae, then slowly shifted toward Nia. And in that instant, both Naya and Kang Min-jae realized something terrifying. They were the real targets, and she had been sent to make sure no one survived the flight unscathed. The woman in black didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her intentions were clear. Kang Min-jae's instincts kicked in immediately. His voice was low, calm, and deliberate. "Who sent you?" The woman tilted her head slightly, acknowledging him, but remained silent. Naya stepped closer, her mind racing. Her calm exterior masked the fear that bubbled beneath. Years of training had prepared her for situations like this, but nothing could have prepared her for a game that involved a flight, a Korean mafia boss, and a mysterious assassin in black. Suddenly, the woman's hand flicked subtly, and a small device clicked open in her palm. A digital screen illuminated with a single phrase. "The real threat is closer than you think." Kang Min-jae's eyes narrowed. Naya's pulse quickened, and the passengers, completely unaware of the deadly psychological battle unfolding, just shifted nervously in their seats. The plane's hum suddenly seemed louder, as if the engines themselves were holding their breath. Every move, every glance, every word from this point forward could trigger a chain reaction. And the question on both their minds was the same. Who was controlling this situation, and what was the real goal? The briefcase the nervous passenger had brought earlier clicked shut in his hands. He swallowed hard and spoke, voice trembling. "They know your schedules, your contacts, even your secrets. You're being lured here. Both of you." Naya glanced at Kang Min-jae. "So the flight itself was the trap?" she whispered. He nodded slowly, scanning the cabin for any other irregularities. "There's more than one player here," he said quietly, "and I don't know who's working with who." The woman in black stepped closer. Her eyes scanned them like a predator sizing up prey. And then, with a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "End this flight alive, if you can." It wasn't a challenge, it was a warning. Nia and Kang Min-jae exchanged a look, silent but loaded with meaning. They both knew their only option was to outthink every person on this plane. As they prepared to make their move, the real twist struck. The passengers, who had seemed ordinary moments ago, suddenly revealed themselves. Some were not passengers, some were operatives. armed and positioned strategically throughout the cabin. The plane's aisles, the storage compartments, even the lavatories, all carefully monitored. The flight had been rigged, and the most shocking revelation, the crew, every single flight attendant, and every member of the cabin staff was part of a highly coordinated surveillance operation. Nia's mind raced. She had been placed there not just to observe Kang Min-jae, but also to counter this operation from the inside. And now, with the agents revealed, the stakes had skyrocketed. Kang Min-jae's voice cut through the tension, calm but lethal. Stay calm, watch their patterns, don't make a move they expect. Nia nodded, her eyes scanning for a weak link, for anything that could give them a fighting chance. And then, she saw it, a small, almost imperceptible glitch in the agent's formation, one that could give them a chance, if they acted quickly. But the moment she pointed it out, the woman in black smiled. "You're faster than I expected," she said. "Boom, but not fast enough." The plane's cabin was about to become a battlefield, and the audience watching this story unfold would not believe what happened next. Kang Min-jae and Nia moved simultaneously, using every ounce of experience and intelligence to outmaneuver the operatives. A series of silent confrontations erupted, whispered threats, hidden movements, eyes locked in deadly anticipation. The envelope, the black card, the digital device, every clue, every tool, every move they made was now part of a high-stakes psychological game. And just when it seemed they might gain the upper hand, the cockpit door opened slowly, and a figure stepped out that neither of them expected. One that changed the entire game in a single moment. A figure with a secret connected to both Nia's past and Kang Min-jae's empire. Well, a figure who would either save them or doom them all. And as the plane continued slicing through the night sky, the voiceover whispers, "Wait until you find out who's really controlling this flight. You won't believe the truth." And the real twist is about to hit. The cockpit door opened wider this time. Every eye in first class shifted instinctively. A tall figure stepped out, hands relaxed, posture confident, a faint smirk playing across his lips. Kang Min-jae's eyes narrowed instantly. Nia's heart skipped a beat, because in that moment, they recognized him, not as an ordinary passenger, not as a colleague, but as the one pulling the strings behind everything, the shadow orchestrating the flight from the start. "Ah, I see you've met my little welcoming committee," the man said calmly, with the voice smooth like silk but carrying lethal undertones. The passengers froze, sensing the authority in his presence. He glanced at the woman in black. She bowed slightly, acknowledging him, not in submission, but in recognition of her role as enforcer. Nia and Kang Min-jae exchanged a look. The pieces fell into place. This wasn't a random operation. This wasn't an accident. This flight had been designed as a test of loyalty, skill, and perception. And the real purpose? To see if Kang Min-jae and Nia could survive together. Nia took a step forward, her calm exterior masking the rapid calculations in her mind. "I know who you are," she said quietly, deliberately, "and I know why you've orchestrated this." The mastermind's smirk widened. "Do you now?" "Yes," she continued, locking eyes with Kang Min-jae as she spoke. "I was placed on this flight, not just to observe you, but to protect someone who didn't even know they needed protection." The passengers leaned in unconsciously, drawn by the tension in her voice, oblivious to the danger looming over them. Kang Min-jae's expression shifted slightly, a mix of surprise, curiosity, and cautious approval. "You were sent to watch me?" he asked. Nia shook her head slowly. "No, to watch everything, including the people who think they control the game." The mastermind's eyes flickered. His amusement remained, but a trace of caution appeared. For the first time, he realized Nia was not just a flight attendant. She was the one wild card he had not accounted for. And wild cards were always dangerous. Then the shocking truth hit like lightning. The black card, the envelope, the digital device. It all planted carefully to guide Kang Min-jae's attention. But there was a second layer. A hidden message, encoded in the flight's manifest. A signal embedded in the cabin layout. And only Nia had noticed it. With a small gesture, she revealed the hidden instructions. showing Kang Min-jae exactly where the real threat was hiding. The mastermind's smirk faltered for a fraction of a second. Kang Min-jae's guards immediately reacted. The woman in black shifted, realizing the trap had been turned. For the first time on the entire flight, the balance of power shifted, and then the mastermind spoke, voice low and dangerous. "You've won this round, but the game isn't over." Passengers screamed as a subtle struggle erupted in the aisles. Hidden operatives revealed themselves. The woman in black moved swiftly, blocking anyone from escaping. But Nia and Kang Min-jae were ready. Every move they had made in the previous hours had led to this moment, a carefully calculated distraction, a silent handoff, a movement so precise that within seconds the mastermind was cornered, his operatives disoriented, the cabin under Nia and Kang Min-jae's control. The plane was still in motion, cutting through the night sky, but the atmosphere inside had shifted completely. And then, just as relief seemed possible, the final twist struck. The mastermind smiled faintly, reaching into his pocket, and pulled out another card. Not black, not digital, but red, with a single sentence written across it. "This was only Act 1. Act 2 begins the moment we land." Kang Min-jae's jaw tightened, Nia's eyes narrowed. The passengers, blissfully unaware of what was truly happening, murmured nervously. And then the narrator's voice would cut through, cinematic and emotionally manipulative. "You thought this flight was over? You thought you knew the truth? Think again. What happens the moment they touch the ground will shock you, and nothing will ever be the same. Subscribe, comment where you're watching from, and brace yourself, because the real story is just beginning."